Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. We're moving more and more of our content there. The most heat anywhere. We've just added a new channel. We will keep adding channels. We will be doing the stage shows all during free agency and draft season. We've got free agency and draft channels. One of them is called Transactions. It's all there. Also, when something hilarious happens to the Knicks, we're on the other NBA channel making fun of it. So check it out. It's Off the Floor, the most heat anywhere. Link in the description. We've got a dedicated link now. There's no excuses. Click on that one. It'll take you there. You're only going to see, if you don't pay the $2.99, you're only going to see like one message from me. Pay the $2.99. You can cancel at any time. Also, check out Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. Put down your $5. You get $50 to play right away. The official fantasy sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Again, use that code. Legal in Florida. Play up to 6 players together. Flex Friday. You can do that. Also, they've got Taco Tuesday. It's all back. Use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Mercy. Luxurious. Heat Nation. Yeah. Mercy and Lago. Down to Biscayne. Yikes. 5 on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Down to Biscayne. Kept the floor playing, got it all band. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
Well, we weren't expecting a lot in award season for this year's Miami Heat. 37-45, 10th seed, made it to the playoffs, got swept, lost the last 2 games by 92 points to a team that lost in the next round. So again, we're not expecting a lot of awards. Khalil Ware did get second team all rookie. If he maybe started a little bit earlier in the season, might have snuck onto the first team like Jaime Jaquez did the year before. But Bam Adebayo did not make an all defense team. And we're going to break that down here a little bit. I can't say I'm stunned. Again, context matters. Team wasn't very good. Bam got off to a slow start offensively this season. And Alex, that's kind of where I'm going to want to go with this episode. How was he defensively? We're going to break that down a little bit today. But let me go through the all defensive teams as they were. The first team, now these are one thing I want to explain to people because I don't think they understand this. I used to vote for a lot of these awards when I used to be important. Now that I'm not, I don't. But I remember, well, anyway, way back when I was during the Big Three era and I had votes, the all defense vote and the defensive player of the year vote are different voters typically. So that's one reason for the confusion where like sometimes you'll have a guy who's like top 3 in defensive player of the year, but he's on the second team or doesn't even make all defense. It's different voters, a lot of them. There's not a ton of crossover. And so I'll go through this. Evan Mobley won defensive player of the year. He also did get the most first team votes and the most total points. I guess there are 100 voters here. So he was on every ballot. 99 first team votes, 1 second place vote, so he led. They do not do this by positions. They just pick the top 5, whoever the top 5 vote getters are. So the top 5 vote getters, and all of them had at least 74 first team votes, so there was not really a lot of dispute, okay? Evan Mobley, Dyson Daniels, who was a very nice pickup for Atlanta. They got him in the DeJounte Murray trade from New Orleans. Lou Dort, of course, sort of their backcourt defensive stalwart in OKC, Draymond Green, and Amen Thompson in his second season. So those are the first 5. And then there was a real drop-off to the next group, which was Zubac from the Clippers, had a real breakout season this year. Jaren Jackson Jr., who, by the way, won Defensive Player of the Year last year. but got marked down a little bit this year. Jalen Williams was second player from OKC. No Alex Caruso, by the way, but again, limited minutes for him in compared. Kamara from Portland. I will give credit to Joe Cronin. He was a nice find. They picked him up in that. Wasn't he? He was picked up in the Dame trade, wasn't he? Yeah. So he's emerged pretty well. And then I got some glee out of this. Rudy Gobert barely made it. Had 3 first team votes and 59 second place votes. He was on 62 ballots. He ended up with what's called 65 points. So if you really look at this, there were, what are we going to say, 4 bigs here. It was a little more split than it typically is.
Did you mention
Mobley on
Draymond?
first. Yeah, I guess I'll call him a big. I mean,
Yeah,
he
he's a
plays some
big.
5. Well, he's all over the place. So Mobley, Draymond on first team, Zubac, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Gobert. And then 5 wing or backcourt players. So I'll just get your initial impression of the list before we get to Bam's exclusion this time.
I mean, it's a pretty good list. Like, all those guys are there for a reason. Obviously, like, even for as much as Gobert gets said about him, even if you don't like, and I don't think he's necessarily a 4-time defensive player of the year level defender, he's obviously a great one. Zubac, I think, is kind of the guy here who you've never seen, kind of on this list before. The other guys here that you mentioned are either current defensive player of the year winners or former ones, right? Or just guys that you see like always mentioned there in general. So I think like the other guys kind of, you're used to seeing those names. Zubac is the new one, and the Clippers, man, like they were a fantastic defense all year long. They were a great defense, and of course it's not just him, but he was at the center of it all. And the breakout for him, of course, like I think was highlighted by the offense and how he was a legit pillar for the Clippers. While Kawhi was out there and kind of inconsistent in the lineup, Harden, Powell, and Zubac were kind of the guys keeping them there in that playoff mix while Kawhi was in and out. And Zubac, man, fantastic year. It's tough to be mad at him with the Clippers being such a great defense, him being ahead. Again, the Timberwolves with like Gobert, for as much hate as he gets, they were the 3rd ranked defense. How mad can you be at them putting like these are elite defenses and they're anchors, and that's what's happening here. It's not that Zubac or Gobert can do as much or more than Bam. Like, we know the context. They play different roles. Like they're more traditional bigs, traditional anchors who aren't guarding out in the perimeter, who can do everything Bam does, but do what they do so well, and then can at times, like, again, Gobert has been put on highlight clips over and over again. Zubac too, by the way, like for when they're switched onto perimeter guys. But for as much as those like lowlights happen for them, they do a good enough job where teams are like okay with the occasional late switch, right? Or the occasional like, they have Zubac and Gobert running the drop, and then it turns into a late switch. Like they can handle themselves, and what stands out for them, of course, is the rim protection and the way that they can anchor a defense and anchor an elite defense, and that's what those guys did. Now, Jaren Jackson is a little bit of a different story because he's not necessarily a traditional big. Of course, has won the award before, the Defensive Player of the Year award. So again, it's hard to be mad when like these teams were just better than you. But honestly, the Heat were ranked 9th in defensive rating. For as much as it didn't feel like it all year, as much as I was complaining about their inconsistent defense, even if you filter to the post Jimmy like span of time, they were still right there hovering around the top 10. So it's not that the Heat were a bad defense, but I feel like the season that they had, maybe took Bam out of the running compared to these other teams that had, great seasons and were elite defenses. So it's like, Bam, you're not going to get it this time around. He'll probably be back on it next season if I had to guess, right? Like he had made it since the first Jimmy year when he became a starter. So odds are he's probably going to be back on it next season, but we'll see.
Well, that you mentioned it, a lot of it is, and I've said this about Bam's Defensive Player of the Year candidacy, it's this weird thing where the better you are on offense and the better your team is overall, the more you're honored for all defense and for Defensive Player of the Year. It's kind of like Derek Jeter in baseball. He used to get these gold gloves when everybody knew he was not a top 5 defensive shortstop, but it was the other stuff that put him front of center for everybody. I will say, looking at this list, 9 of the 10 teams had better records than the Heat. The only one that didn't is Portland. So and
By
a
the
lot
way,
of them were a lot better.
quick thing, I'm just looking at the Grizzlies right now. They actually finished behind the Heat in defensive rating for the season. So
But
if
I
you want
don't
to
think I
nitpick,
don't think I right, but I don't think that the voters are looking at that. I think they're looking at record, and Memphis was better than Miami this
for
year.
sure.
Well, they were for most of the year, although they ended up in the same seed once the playoffs started. But I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think as we pivot here to the second part of the episode, I think what I want to get into is how good was Bam defensively this year? Because I know people want us to do this episode, and we probably will, and we were going to do it today, but with this news, we decided to push it up a little bit, where we got into the idea of trading Tyler and the different ways that you could reshape the roster if you did, maybe trading for an existing, a rising player who's not extension eligible quite yet. Like we just did that episode, you and I did actually. And we'll do the BAM episode too. I don't really want to go there with this because, again, we have the news we want to focus on, but it is something for those who've asked us to do that episode. We will look at
All of
if
you
you
two.
traded Bam, what could you actually get? Well, do you want me to who should I have do that episode? If I force Greg to do it, he's going to quit. I don't know which he won't do that
Be on for
episode.
that. I think
Be
it'll be
on for
good
that.
because I'm always the guy defending Bam. So you're putting me in
Yeah.
a situation that I don't necessarily want to be in, and
Yeah,
I'll do
I
it
like
in
that.
good faith, man. I'll do it in good
I
faith.
appreciate that. All right. Well, in good faith, if you're looking for real estate, you're looking for good faith people, won't take advantage of you. Make sure that they show you everything that they should, whether you're buying or selling your house. Go to Real Estate Shop. Check it out at realestateshopfl.com. That's realestateshopfl.com. Based in Broward, our friends Javier and Amanda. Javier is going to join us on the pod here soon. We'll see what his opinion is on Bam and on Tyler and on everybody else. But these are the folks you want to go to, again, if you're buying or selling your house. Broward County, they're all over Broward. I live in Broward. They're in my area in Lauderdale. They're out in Pines. They're in Sunrise. They're in Davie, Plantation, everywhere. But they can help you out in Dade County as well. So check that out. RealEstateShopFL.com. The Fort Lauderdale Realtor. Really good people. Huge Miami Heat fans. Look, they have their own family. If you have a family, they know exactly what it is that you're dealing with and what you need for your family as you move into your next house. Interest rates going back up again. They can manage all of that for you. So check it out, realestateshopfl.com or the Fort Lauderdale Realtor on IG. All right, so tell me here, for the untrained eye, as their expulsion would say, did Bam slip defensively this year?
I think, honestly, the beginning of the season, for as much as you're right that it was, I think the struggles at the beginning of the season were mostly mired by the offensive stuff. I do think there's been in the past couple of seasons some slippage here and there as far as how for his standards, right? It doesn't mean that there's a decline, like he's not an elite level defender anymore. I still believe he is for sure, and I still think he's around the top 5 level defender in the league, right? When you weigh the position he plays and how much he can do and all those things, I think sometimes there's been a little bit of slippage, right? Like it's really hard to be on point throughout an entire regular season over and over and over and over again, especially when over the past couple of seasons he's taken on a bigger offensive load, even with all the inconsistencies and how he's not always, giving Heat fans exactly what they want as far as shot attempts and quote unquote aggressiveness. Like he is, no doubt about it, whether he's scoring or not, a huge part of the offense. And I feel like, with the less that Jimmy's been involved over the past couple of seasons, and then of course this year with the way that it all ended, he's been tasked with a little bit more, and I do think that's part of what's led to some of the slippage. Now, another thing, another factor is that he was in the Olympics last season, maybe didn't get a full off season. I'm not trying to make any excuses. I'm just trying to consider the context of the season that he had and how tough it was pre-Jimmy, post-Jimmy, right? And all that type of stuff. It was a weird season, not exactly the one for a Heat player to be honored. So again, for as much as I do think he deserves to be on that list just by the caliber of defensive player he is, this would be the year for him to miss it. No doubt about it. And then the other thing is, I'm pretty sure the voting ended. I'm not 100% sure. You would know better than me, but I'm pretty sure the voting was ended before the playoffs started.
Yes, yes. They always do. The only question I have is if it ended before the play-in, but it always ends
Yeah, because the Heat gave up if you just look at, obviously, the samples are different, but
right.
The Heat's playoff defensive rating is 18 points worse than the next team.
Right.
So it's not an apples to apples, they only play 4 games, but man, it's just hard. It's just really hard to award somebody after that.
Well, let me ask you that then. How did he play defensively in that series?
Not good enough.
Okay. Is there any
It's
way to
not on.
separate it from the way the rest of them played? It's hard, right? I mean,
It's
he had
like
Davion working his ass off. Beyond that, I don't really know.
yeah. I think first of all the perimeter defense was bad. Like for as much as Davion tries and all that, it wasn't his fault. But in general, I would say like as a whole, their ball pressure wasn't good. Um, the forcing the turnovers wasn't good, and I feel like the defense was constantly getting compromised. Like there was leaks uh all over the place, and Bam is having to patch them up. I feel like he's at his best. Like you saw that the year that they were the first seed, which still feels kind of like a fever dream now. Like the further and further we get away from it, with how much regular season struggles they've had since then. But the year that they were the first seed, man, when he had all that defensive talent around him, like Bam, I like that was probably the year for him to win it, to win the Defensive Player of the Year, right? The pre-Victor era, the Heat were the first seed, were a fantastic defense, and everybody knew they were going to be going into the season after they added Lowry and Tucker. Like there was a decent level of hype for that, right? And they were that level of defensive team. That's probably the best one we've seen, in the entire Butler era. And I think that's where Bam is at his best, where it's like, okay, he's not having to fill in the gaps and plug a bunch of holes 24/7. And what he showed you this season is that he can also keep up really strong defensive play playing next to a big. Now, of course, there's still like the jury is still out on how effective it'll end up being, like how long they stick to this, because that's not necessarily set in stone, right? But he's shown you he has shown you in the past how many different things he can do. He showed you something else this year. Like we already know he can roam, but now like we saw it in practice for a decent amount of sample size, even with a big and Ware who isn't necessarily always on point with where he needs to be, and as a rookie. So imagine what it could look like with a guy who is just in general like a better version of himself. I think there's even more, like they're just kind of scratching the surface there, right? And there's a lot more work to be done. But Bam has kind of checked off all the boxes, man. Like he does everything you can slot him anywhere. The problem is how many how many holes does he have to gap? I mean, like Bill.
Right. Well, and that is a roster construction issue, and that's what they have to address this offseason. And part of it is, are you re-signing Davion? What's Wiggins' role going to be?
Defense was terrible, by the way.
What are you going to do with? I mean, with Tyler, how are you protecting him, so to speak? Is Duncan still going to be here? How does Ware develop? How much of a role is Jovic going to have? We're probably going to do an episode. I mean, the Heat are basically like. I mean, they just put out another post about how big he's gotten, and I wonder defensively, will that help? Will that hurt? How much is he going to play? Ware's got to adjust to his body as it grows, which is something that they've talked about. He talked about himself adding strength. I guess I'll close it here, and we'll do another episode on Bam later on. I think at some point we do take for granted what Bam does defensively. Certainly Spoelstra doesn't. We have had the debate about max players and whether or not a true max, needs to do everything. If there's really only 10 of those guys in the league. And I think that's where this debate with Bam gets a little bit complicated. I don't think anybody on our side is saying this is not a great defender. This is a great defender. And he's a good offensive player.
The problem is when he gets talked about like he's Ben Wallace, who just does nothing on offense other than like rebound.
He's not, and he's not Draymond either. Okay, in that regard, like this idea that he's like Draymond East, he's not. Okay, but the thing is, there are things that Draymond does offensively that help grease, Golden State's offense. I don't want to. I don't want to diminish him too much, because you're talking about a guy who has been a facilitator, has been their ball mover for Curry, all the other things that he does, even if he's not a great shooter. But this idea that Bam was going to turn into Giannis or turn into this, every night offensive force, I don't think we foresee that at this stage. But I do think that, just as we talked about offensively, putting him in the best position and then him running with it, they need to figure out a way defensively where he is not the stopgap. Like I feel like Water Cleanup of Florida is our sponsor. We probably should use them as a sponsor on this one. I feel like he's just, like you said, plugging leaks everywhere. And then there are certain points of the season. In this case, it was the beginning of the season, and the season prior, it was the second half of the season, where he just looks gassed. He doesn't, and it's not because he's not well conditioned. He may be the best conditioned person on the entire team, but it's just you're asking him to do so much because of the talent or talent deficiency that you have around him.
Yep.
And it's not giving him the best chance to reach whatever that ceiling is. I do disagree with Greg. There is a ceiling here. He's not going to become prime Bron, okay? But I think that defensively, he paid this year in some ways for the long summer that he had of playing for
And
the
the
Jimmy
team sucking
stuff
at
that I
offense.
think wore on it, right? And all of that, exactly. And
I mean,
I think
their transition defense was what was like really like they're bad about them because their half court defense was in the top 10. And like, how do they get back?
yeah.
And how do you end up in transition defense more often than not? Is being a terrible offense who's constantly having
Mm-hmm.
to get back, and it's just not what they were good at. So I think part of it was like they're a bad team, and the bad parts of their defense were a little bit more. Like they were there, and they didn't have the defensive playmaking aspect that they used to. He used to be like pretty
No.
damn good at forcing turnovers. It's just not who
Well,
they
Jimmy
are
was.
anymore.
Well, Jimmy was. They don't have a guy to play those passing lanes anymore. It's just not what any of these guys do. But you mentioned it, and I don't want to pick on him too much. But in my head, I have a lot of Terry Rozier step backs, chuck it up, long rebounds, don't get back in transition, hoops the other way. And that's not something Bam would ever say publicly, but it's something we watched. Anyway, we'll see if he makes it next year. More episodes to come. Thanks to our sponsors, Real Estate Shop, FL.com, Prize Picks. Use the code FIVE.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.